Hello, my friends. We have returned once again to talk about vampires and shit. So this is the story of the capstone, I guess, of the 1950s era in my vampire tabletop game. This happens at the end of other things I talked about with the Sabbat and the Bali. Forgot what they were called for a second. This ended up being one of the most long-term impactful events in the game. And like most of the things that ended up having really long-term impacts in the game, it mostly happened accidentally and did not go the way I had intended it. So I'll explain how I intended things to go, what I intended to have happen, and then what ended up happening and why. I had a lot of Nosferatu with not much to do. I think I talked in an earlier video about 3 different players told me they were going to play Nosferatu. So I made a huge Nosferatu faction and brood in the city, but then none of my players played Nosferatu. So there wasn't a lot for those NPC Nos to do. There was a vying for princedom in the first section of the game. And I didn't know going into it whether the players were going to side with this person or that person. They ended up siding with Divya, the Ventru. Because of that, I had a lot of NPCs who survived that kind of Game of Thrones, but didn't have much to do anymore. And I'm a very big believer in never wasting content. So if I took the time to stat out some NPCs, give them names, and find character portraits, I want to find a reason to use them for something. In the official vampire lore, there's a huge anarch revolt in the 1940s. That didn't happen in my game because starting from earlier than that, in the 1920s, the players had helped establish this, very strong Ventru prince. Going into the 50s now, you still had all of these anarch NPCs around who the players hadn't interacted with much, and I decided it would make sense for them to try to get that anarch revolt going again, since it had failed before, and do something along those lines. And I started that off at the beginning of the decade by telling them that there has been this big anarch upheaval in San Francisco. The idea that I had was that the anarchs were going to come down to Los Angeles. They were going to approach the players, and they are going to suggest that maybe the anarchs should come down here and overthrow Divya. And they would have the choice to decide, do we want to still support Divya as prince and still be going down that traditional Camarilla path, or have we had enough of that now and we would like to change horses in midstream and switch over to the anarchs? And this is what we did. I had the NPC called Mama Lion, who was kind of the leader of these anarchs, approach Anna and pitch this anarch revolt concept to Anna. And what I thought was going to happen was Anna would hear this out, she would go to the other players, they would discuss it, they would decide what they wanted to do. They would probably, I figured, side with Divya, but maybe they would side with the anarchs. There'd be some politicking behind the scenes, then there'd be a big battle to end the decade, and this would all be happening simultaneously to the stuff with the Bali and that whole investigation, so that it just added to the constant sense of paranoia that was going on in that decade. That, the Sabbat are in the city, there's bodies being moved around in coffins, there's people disappearing, there's kids floating up on shores, the Bali are running around doing weird experiments and sacrifices, and then you also have these anarchs trying to infiltrate the city and switch people's allegiances around. But things didn't really go exactly the way I had intended it, and there are really 2 reasons for that, which basically just came down to the actions of my players, one being the actions of Anna, and then the other one being the actions of Lupita. The player who plays Anna is not someone who has any real interest in politics and scheming and anything like that.
I protest. I am not a merry man.
She plays a Bruja for a reason, which is that she mostly just likes to run in and beat people to death. I assumed that she would do what seemed likely for her to do, which is that if someone comes to her with a scheme, she would just say, "That's an interesting scheme you have there," and she would take it to the other players who like schemes and be like, "Hey, there's a scheme. What do you guys think about the scheme? And then they would, as a group, decide what to do. But that didn't happen. Instead, surprising me, Anna just accepted this and said, you know what? Yeah, I will join your rebellion. I would like to overthrow the Camarilla. And I'm not even going to tell anybody. I'm not going to tell the other players. Fuck them. Let's just burn this city to the ground. Which I had not expected. I had not expected she was going to do that. Then something else that I had not expected happened, which was that Anna missed a bunch of games. I think she was house hunting. And so she missed something like, I don't know, 4 or 6 games in like a 2-month period because she kept taking weekends off to go look at houses. Because she wasn't there, 2 different things happened. First, all of the stuff that was supposed to be happening simultaneous to the Anarch stuff, like the things with the Bali, that all happened when she wasn't around. She missed most of it. And so rather than these multiple storylines kind of progressing in tandem, her stuff had to be postponed and all the other stuff moved forward, which kind of fucked up the intertwined paranoia of the period. But more importantly, it led to a situation where we had this starting point where this is the political situation in the city and the players are going to pick a side. But by the time Anna came back and was attending games again seriously, it was like she said, yes, I'm picking a side and I'm not including the others. Then she missed almost 2 months and then she came back and the political situation had evolved a lot in the city since then. The game was still going. A lot of things had changed. And so it just wasn't the same scenario that she had been in. Alliances had shifted. People's opinions of things had shifted. The Nosferatu were in a very different place, and so a lot of stuff wasn't the way it had been when I had originally set up the story, and so it played out differently. Partially because Anna's player just does not really engage much in politics, and partially because she missed so many sessions. What I had anticipated happening, which was the players going around and talking to a lot of NPCs and trying to bring them over to their side for this Anarch revolution, never happened. Anna didn't do any kind of political work on her own to recruit anyone. Even when she returned and I gave her the opportunity, and I prompted her multiple times, like, do you want to go talk to anyone? Do you want to go speak to any NPCs? Do you want to try and recruit anybody? The other Brujah tell you this is a good idea. She just was like, no, I don't. Because that's not the kind of stuff she likes to do. She had no interest in doing it. I had expected this to happen while they were dealing with the Bali and while they were dealing with the Sabbat. In which case, Divya's allies, whether those allies included the players or not, would be divided, dealing with these 3 different threats. The Bali are tearing the city apart, the Sabbat are running around in the sewers, and now Anarchs are attacking. But because Anna missed so many sessions, by the time the Anarchs got going, the Bali had all been wiped out, and the Sabbat had left the city. There was also the Brujah themselves. Anna's pack of Brujah, the Wyatt family. The most powerful fighter there, other than Anna herself, was Brother Bray. He was the oldest, sort of the leader of the pack. And Brother Bray died. He died fighting the Bali. More significant, a lot of the Nosferatu are dead. Perdita is one of the best fighters among the Nosferatu, but she gets killed in the sewers by the Sabbat because of Lupita. So the Brujah are weakened. The Nosferatu are even more weakened. And then a lot of the allies that would have joined them don't show up. And then the final problem has to do, again, with Lupita. I'd already talked about Lupita's demise in an earlier video. And she died in this burning house while Nathan and Bertram were trying to rescue her. Gaming is about consequences, or at least, narrative-driven gaming is about consequences. If you just want to roll dice and say that you got the biggest number on your dice, you can go play Dungeons & Dragons any day of the week.
I completely said when you asked me... No, you didn't! You didn't actually say that you were casting the spell, so now there's ogres, okay? Ogres? Man, I got an ogre slaying knife. It's got a +9 against ogres. You're not there. You're getting drunk.
But if you're trying to do actual serious narrative gaming, it's about player actions and the consequences of those actions.
There will be consequences!
And that isn't only just things about, like, did we do this quest, or did we kill this guy? It's also about things like, how do these NPCs perceive us? Is this person my friend? Bertram was already, as I'm always thinking about what my NPCs are thinking, was already opposed to this idea of overthrowing Divya, really didn't think it was a good idea. And being that Bertram is supposed to be this kind of master of spies, you know, he's supposed to be like Varys the Spider and knows everything that's going on, he knows, just like I as the game master know, that Anna is not going around recruiting a big army, she's just coming in with a bunch of brouhaha and expecting that to carry the day. And then we have that final incident with Lupita's death, where Nathan is there helping him trying to save Lupita. And I felt like, considering all the things that Bertram was already worried about, I decided that it made sense for Bertram to make a decision at this point. And so I rolled for him. And what I rolled was that he was going to betray Stone Tree. So Bertram goes to Divya and tells her the entire plan that these Nosferatu have, and then just silently backs away. And so when Stone Tree and all the other Nosferatu show up to this ambush, Bertram and his people just aren't there. The original intention was that if the players joined the Anarchs, they would bring a bunch of allies to bear and have this massive army that would ambush Divya, swarm her, like, 50 or 60 vampires swarming her at once, and she is alone and not expecting attack, and that would be enough to bring her down. Now instead they have a situation where Divya is not alone and knows she's going to be attacked and has prepared for it, and the number of vampires swarming her is about half of what I had optimistically expected. The end of this is Divya is summoned to this meeting at this house where she's told that some weird thing is going on that has to do with the Bali, or I think it was that the Giovanni wanted to speak to her or something. So she drives over there where the Anarchs have set up this ambush. The Nosferatu have arranged this. Before they go, Divya performs this ritual of 1,000 cuts or something. It has some name like that. And she puts this curse on Big Little Eddie, the gangrel, who far and away of all the people who were coming to kill her, he is the most dangerous one. Because he's a gangrel. He's like a 700-year-old gangrel. He's got fortitude out the ass. He's virtually unkillable. Like, you would have to fight this guy for a fucking hour to get through all the fortitude he has and kill him. But this ritual depletes him significantly so that he's not able to resist damage. So Divya, Nathan, Zeus, which is her ghoul, and Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, who are these 3 Rottweilers. They're also ghouls, but they're really old ghouls. I think they're from like the 1700s or something. And so, being really old ghouls, they have a couple of levels of potence on them. They drive out to the middle of nowhere where they're going to get ambushed, and Divya just stops at the ambush site and gets out of the car. Over the horizon comes this army of vampires on motorcycles. It's the brouhaha. Like, here they are, this whole Anarch army, and as they come roaring over the hill, blitzing towards her on their motorcycles, and some of them just like running through the forest with celerity, just like, and all these Nosferatu decloak all around them like this big ambush party. Divya immediately summons this massive inferno of fire and then pulls out of it a fire elemental, and the battle begins.
It will be worse for you if you try to fight me, but that's up to you.
This was by far the biggest combat we had in this game, and really the biggest combat I had run in a while. I believe it was a couple hours that it took us to adjudicate all this. So I can't go through like every detail. I don't even remember everything that happened, but I can explain the high points. The first thing that happens in this fight as these motorcycles rush in is Divya and the fire elemental create this wall of flame. Now, some of the Bruja go around the wall of flame, but a bunch of them decide to jump it. And so they run their motorcycles up and try and jump over this wall of flame. And some of the Bruja execute this incredibly badass entrance where they just come careening over the wall of flame, screaming as they descend down on their motorcycles. And it was really cool. It definitely would have put the fear in the hearts of men. Unfortunately, about 2/3 of them instead frenzied and caught fire as they went through the flame, and the Bruja army was dealt a pretty much fatal blow in like the first round of combat. A bunch of them fly into fear frenzy and take off into the woods. As soon as the fight starts, the Tremere show up, and Simon the Devious teleports himself in, not only himself, but also a bunch of other kindred with him, multiple Tremere and Lacroix, and also Colin Robinson, who is the Scourge. Colin Robinson gets fucked up immediately in this fight. It had been a long time that I'd been building up how badass this guy was, and in the one and only combat he was ever in the campaign, he shows up and he immediately gets punched in the face by one of the Bruja so hard that it like nearly kills him, and then he just vanishes and runs the fuck away. It does nothing. The Tremere start throwing fireballs and summoning lightning bolts on people. The Bruja are rushing in. There are all these Nosferatu just like come charging up and attacking people, and then from on high, Big Little Eddie descends in like this gigantic owl form and crashes down. And I can't remember who it was who took out Big Little Eddie, but Big Little Eddie arrives, the ultimate badass, and then gets swarmed because his generation has been fucked by this curse. He can't fortitude through a lot of the damage, and instead of just shrugging it off, he gets just iced completely. Like in just 1 or 2 rounds he gets taken out. I think he lasted maybe like 1 turn, and I don't think he even managed to really do much of anything. He was just getting pummeled. Stone Tree is tearing people apart, but eventually he gets put down, beaten into torpor, and staked, I think by Divya. Smilin' Jack is there as well. He's probably the person who did the most good in this fight for the Anarch side, but eventually he also fled. I think he got set on fire and frenzied at some point and then just booked it. There's a lot of fire being thrown around between Simon and Divya and the fire elemental. The forest is just burning. Like, it's bad. The most memorable and ignoble moment in the entire fight was what happened to Mama Lion. Mama Lion is supposed to be the big badass, and she lasted 1 turn in actual combat, and it was one of the most embarrassing turns we've ever seen in one of my games. She blitzed in to attack Divya, and then Divya's dogs attack her, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. All 3 hit her with their potent attacks, and the 3 dogs, one after another, manage to put her down. They knock her into torpor before she can heal through, because she didn't have enough fortitude to block the damage. All the way up to the very end of the game, to the very last day, which was like a year after this battle, a year of real time after this battle, because this campaign went for 2 years. Anna would still, like every couple weeks, would find some reason to remember and become furious about how pissed off she was at Mama Lion for fucking up this battle and getting taken out by 3 Rottweilers after she was supposed to be the ultimate badass who was gonna kick Divya's ass. When Mama Lion and Anna first met, Anna said to her in character, so like, well, Divya's pretty badass. Do you think you can handle it? And Mama Lion had she said something like, oh, don't worry. I've dealt with her kind before. And Anna's like, cool. And then she gets taken out by her pets. it was pretty embarrassing. Eventually, most of the Brujah start breaking and running. Not even really that many of them got killed, but a bunch of them frenzied right at the beginning because of the fire, and then a bunch of them kept frenzying because, you know, the Tremere kept throwing fire at them, and even though it wasn't killing very many of them, they kept panicking and running. And once like Mama Lion and Stone Tree and Sister Abigail and Big Little Eddie were all torpored or dead, the Brujah just start fleeing. And especially after Jack runs, they start fleeing. Except for the one Anarch who actually kind of, you know, earns her stripes in this fight, which is Anna. Anna just goes after Divya. She's wielding this magic weapon that Dracula gave her. But she is just in there like beating the fuck out of Divya with this stick. Like, you know, a police baton that sparkles or something, I don't know. And it's really having no effect because Divya has so much fortitude that it's almost impossible to deal any damage to her. Just wailing on her to no avail. And Divya keeps hitting her back. And so eventually she realizes she has to book it out of here. And then she runs into Lacroix. I think she threw like a flaming motorcycle at him. Sounds like what happened. I can't remember exactly. Lacroix, like, Darth Vader's her. He, like, force grabs her with movement of the mind and, like, lifts her and just throws her into a inferno of flames. After she got force hurled into the flames, Anna frenzied, I believe, and bolted and just barely got out with her life. She was pretty upset about the entire situation. Pretty angry, not at me or the other players, angry at the Anarchs for how bullshit they had been, which I gotta say, if all of the other Brujah had fought as hard and as effectively as Anna did, they actually might have been able to win the fight, because even with all the disadvantages there, all those Brujah have like high levels of celerity and potence, and even though they were outnumbered and they were dealing with a bunch of, you know, fucking Tremere bullshit, if they had all been rolling pretty well and had really gone in hard, just purely by means of super speed and super strength, they probably could have won, or at least they could have killed everyone. But unfortunately, in addition to the Brujah not being super bright and being outnumbered and out-strategized, I rolled absolute garbage for the Brujah throughout that fight. It was just one of those situations where they just kept failing checks one after another. Like jumping over the fire sounds like you hear that out of context and you think like he was just suiciding the Brujah to throw the fight. But that isn't the thing. Like, the difficulty for them to do that was actually really easy. I was just doing it for like a badass moment. In fact, in retrospect, I shouldn't have even rolled for it. I should have just said it happened. I should have said, like, they jumped their motorcycles over the flame. You know, the reason that Mama Lion got wiped out so fast was that when those 3 dogs attacked her, I think 2 of the dogs critted their attacks, which was just insane. Like, I had no idea that was going to happen. And then, like, the Brujah kept failing all of their willpower checks against Frenzy, which is not surprising for Brujah, because they're bad at resisting Frenzy, but it was... They were doing unusually poorly. And so Anna was understandably pretty angry. She had to roll up a new character. Anna fucked off to San Francisco, I think. She and the remainder of these Brujah ran back to the Anarch state. And the funniest part of this was that Enzo wasn't in the city for any of it. Enzo was in Chicago. Enzo came back and with no idea what had been going on. And he comes into Elysium and everybody is pretty pissed. A lot of people are missing. And Divya is sitting there in her throne, and she has up on the walls, like, flanking her, right? She has the bodies of Mama Lion and Stone Tree, like, crucified on the walls, staked and immobilized, where they remained for the next 40 years. She would bring them out at every big Elysium and put them on display just to remind everybody what happens if you cross her. And it cemented, I had not intended this, but it cemented really into the minds of the of the players, the idea that, well, Divya is just this insurmountable force of nature. We can't ever speak against her. The level of fear that they had for Divya was probably... I don't think I've ever had another NPC in one of my games who I genuinely felt like my players were so intimidated by. But anyway, that was Anna's Rebellion. Not the most successful rebellion of all time. But, you know, them's the breaks. When you play the Game of Thrones, either you win or you die. I think it was Groucho Marx who said that. And this was one of those cases where they definitely did not win. So anyway, that's the story of Anna's Rebellion. I hope that was entertaining. I hope maybe you learned something. And thank you for watching.
You know why I'm here.
You've come to kill me.
Don't take it personally.